Well, hi, I'm Matt, one of the Maybridge staff. Thanks for joining us today, especially if you're not a regular at Maybridge. We're delighted to have you. Please look at our website or our social media stuff to find out more about us, or if you want to get involved in any way. Now, we're working our way each Sunday through Matthew's Gospel at the moment, the first book of the New Testament. Every line of it is loaded with meaning and significance. It's genius, and it's an account of the life of Jesus, and it shows, among other things, how Jesus fulfills the Old Testament story in a unique way that also somehow connects with our own lives here and now. And today we're at the start of chapter 4. Last time we saw Jesus beginning his public ministry by being baptised, and you think, okay, well, that's all well and good. Surely now he's going to do some big miracle or teach something important. No. First things first, he goes and spends a big chunk of time in the desert praying, but it somehow becomes a story about temptation. Let's read what happens. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. During that time the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you're the Son of God, jump off, for the scriptures say he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God." Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. "I'll give it all to you," he said, "if you will kneel down and worship me." "Get out of here, Satan," Jesus told him, "for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil went away, and angels came and took care of Jesus. So just to be really clear from the off, this is a story where a supernatural being who personifies evil appears to a Jewish religious teacher who hasn't eaten in 6 weeks and tries to tempt him to do some alternative baking, a little bit of base jumping, and then bow down to him in order to take possession of planet Earth. Let's just state the obvious from the start. This is weird from where we sit right now. It just sounds really weird. I've never noticed anything like this happening in Worthing. Seems to me to be more like a Brighton on a Friday night sort of thing. Clearly, this is a story that is far outside what we experience every day. It's not normal. Let's just get that out up front. But hold on for a second. Let's think about what this says about temptation in particular and how that resonates with how we each experience life. Because I think we'll find this actually a lot closer to our experience than maybe first appears. I'm sure that we all experience temptation to do things that either we don't want to do or we know that we shouldn't do. I'm sure of that. And there is a connection with our experiences and the life of Jesus. See how this plays out. And however you might initially feel about the supernatural stuff, see if this rings true to how you experience temptation in your life day to day. The story begins with Jesus heading into the desert. I love how it says, after 40 days and nights, he was hungry. I mean, really, Matthew, was he hungry? By this point, I would have been thinking about food for approximately 39 days and 23 hours. After 40 days, of course he was hungry. But this is not by accident. One of the things Matthew does when he tells us the story of Jesus is he retells an Old Testament story, but shows how Jesus does it better. Early in the Old Testament, the Hebrew people escaped from Egypt. It was all very exciting, but then they spent 40 years wandering aimlessly around the desert. And the reason it took so long is that they kept making big mistakes. They kept rejecting God in different ways. You could say that their problem was they gave in to every temptation under the sun. And they were there for 40 years. Jesus, meanwhile, has 40 days. And so what Matthew's doing, the author, is he's saying, look, Jesus is like the whole nation of Israel going off into the desert, only look at how he responds to temptation very differently from how they responded. And the person tempting Jesus is none other than the devil himself, sometimes known as Satan, because in the Bible, evil is not just a bad idea, it's tied to a person. The devil is a being created by God. He's much less powerful than God, much less powerful, but he totally and permanently rejects God's ways. The devil is the ultimate liar and manipulator. Some say the greatest lie he ever perpetuated in the Western world where we live is the idea that he doesn't even exist. Most of us would certainly, of course, never claim to have seen him, but his influence is felt in every lie and deceit and act of selfishness. But when it comes to Jesus, the devil knows this is the big one. If he can break Jesus, then he wins. You cannot overstate how important this interaction is in this story. If Jesus gives into temptation, he cannot live the perfect life. He cannot sacrifice himself for humanity. He cannot be God come to earth. And so the devil is as cowardly as he is tactical. He tries to get Jesus when he hasn't even eaten for 40 days. Why? Because everybody is more vulnerable to temptation when they're hungry. And the devil uses 3 different approaches, 3 different temptations, different ways to try to get under Jesus' skin, to try to get him to give in. Firstly, he says, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. And secondly, he says, if you're the Son of God, jump off the temple, he means, the big building in Jerusalem. For the scriptures say he will order his angels to protect you and they will hold you up with their hands so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. Do you see how devious the devil is? In both of these first 2 temptations, he says, if you're the Son of God. If. He tries to question Jesus' identity. If you were really the Son of God, you would do these things, wouldn't you, Jesus? The heart of these temptations is to get Jesus to strive to prove himself in some way. I would imagine that you've had similar things happen in your own mind. Whatever you believe about God, the temptation to lie or self-promote or manipulate a situation, to take a shortcut in some way, whatever it may be, to prove who you are in some way, to prove that you're valid, that you matter. But each of these 2 temptations is also unique. The first one isn't really about bread. There's nothing wrong with eating bread unless you're gluten intolerant. The temptation is to self-dependence. And in our culture, of course, self-dependence is a bit of a virtue. I don't need anybody, I make my own way. And it's all about pride and putting ourselves forward. But the devil is saying to Jesus, you don't need God. Make it about you. Go on, you can make a sandwich out of thin air. Why not? Just go and do it. The second one also isn't about base jumping off a high building, also not a sin. It's about revelling in the attention and praise of other people. Go on, Jesus. Jump off a great height in public. The angels will catch you. It'll be spectacular. The crowds will love you. Nobody will ever again doubt that you're somebody special. It's all about seeking after the validation and approval of the people around us. Of course, none of us have ever had that experience, have we? The temptation to do that. Except that we do. It's very easy to build our entire lives around what people say and think about us without even knowing that we're doing it. The devil's temptations show us that he knows human nature actually very well. The biggest longings of humanity, according to sociologists, are for love, security, and significance. That's what these temptations are all about. All our temptations are really about getting those things cheaply, to get them the wrong way. So those are the first 2. But I want to spend a bit more time on the third temptation because it's the strongest. Here's what it said again. Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendour. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So the stakes get higher and higher as we go through the temptations. First one is satisfy your hunger. You're hungry, make some food. Second one is look awesome. Look so incredible and amazing that people will be in love with you. And third temptation is you get the entire planet. You get the world. Satan is desperate, but he's also very clever. He creates a picture. He makes the temptation very clear. He doesn't just tell Jesus, but he shows him, in this case, in some sort of vision. And temptation works for us in a similar way because it paints a picture for us. Whenever you're tempted, you imagine yourself maybe happier, more comfortable, more in control. If I have that thing, if I get it, or if I do that thing, I'll get something I really want. Things will be better. I'll be happier. I'll be safer. And the devil speaks to Jesus and he uses this phrase, I will give to you. For this temptation, I'll give you. And there's 2 problems with that. One is that it's not his to give. In the Bible, Satan has loads of power, a lot of influence over things that happen in the world, but it's not his. He can't give it. And 2, it's not a gift. Evil doesn't do gifts. It's a payment. He's saying, Jesus, if you obey me, I'll pay you with this stuff. That's the trade. So it's all lies and half-truths. It's what Satan does very well, lies and half-truths that sound true. Isn't our world full of them? But let's dig into this particular temptation a bit more. What's it really about? What is the temptation here? It's basically centred on pursuing the right thing the wrong way. The right thing, something good, but getting it in the wrong way. And the reason this is tempting, so tempting, is the prize that Satan is offering is actually what Jesus is there for. Jesus is God's rescue plan for humanity. He's there in the first place to rescue people from every kingdom on earth. In other words, to get everyone, to get the whole lot. And Satan is saying, here's a shortcut. Go on, Jesus. You don't want to do all that dying on the cross stuff. That's terrible. We don't want you to go through that. Oh no, let's broker a deal right now. I'll step back and you can have power over all these things without all the stress. All you have to do is bow down to me right now. And it all gets a lot easier. And the thing with temptation is it's always tempting, obviously. Nobody is tempted by something they don't want. If one of the church staff leaves a freshly baked cake on their desk and nobody's around, that's tempting. If they do the same thing with a beetroot and walnut salad, not so much. Very easy to resist that one. The more we want the thing, the bigger the temptation. And what the devil does here is he offers Jesus something he really wants, something he really, really cares about, the world, without having to do something that he really, really wants to avoid, being crucified. What could be more tempting? So this isn't subtle at all. The devil only has one card left to play in terms of temptation. He's desperate for Jesus to fail. He's put everything into this one. And so this is it. I think this is the greatest temptation that anyone has ever been offered in history. And there's only one reason that Jesus says no, and that we'll come back to. Now, on a smaller scale, I think we all experience the same thing. I don't think the devil has offered any of us all the kingdoms of the world. That's because he doesn't need to go that far to make us crack. The devil is like a stereotype used car salesman. He sees us coming. He sees us a mile off. He only needs to offer a deal as far as it needs to go to tempt us, to draw us in, to snag us. That's what he needs to do. But of course, we all face the temptation to do the right thing the wrong way. And it's a very effective type of temptation because it makes us feel like the end justifies the means. We think, it's okay if I tell a little lie in the job interview because I need the job to support my family, and that's a good thing. Or we think, if I cheat on this exam, I'll get into a better university and then I can do the course that I think that God wants me to do. So maybe it's not so bad if I do that. The root of this sort of temptation is around compromising your sense of right and wrong in order to control the direction of your life. It's looking for a shortcut to get something good, to have control. And the reason it's so tempting, and the reason that we sometimes give into this sort of temptation, is that we fear missing out in some way. We fear not getting the thing that we're really after. And even further than that, it comes down to how far we trust God with what happens in our lives. And here's why. If you believe that God is good and he can be trusted, you don't need to lie and cheat and take moral shortcuts. You just do what's right and trust him with the outcome. But every time we give in to temptation, it's because we're actually saying to ourselves, I know better than God how to do my life. I'll just take care of this. Yeah, I know that there's different points of view on this, or I know my conscience doesn't feel good about this. I'll just take care of it though, and then we'll move on. Every time you give into a temptation, that's exactly what's happening. And the thing is, every time you give into a temptation, you erode your confidence in God because you don't know that he can be trusted with it. It's one more occasion when you haven't exercised that trust and seen that it's valid. Going back to the story, as I said before, this is very similar, and deliberately so, to a story earlier in the Bible. There's a bit at the beginning of the Old Testament, the book of Deuteronomy. The Jewish people are wandering around in the desert after they'd got out of captivity in Egypt. God had rescued them in this amazing, spectacular way. And then the problem for a million or two people wandering around the desert is very quickly it's hard to find food. And in that particular story, God miraculously provides food each day. They just wake up in the morning and there's some food on the ground. It's absolutely mad, but amazing. And God provides day after day after day. But people being people, they start to get worried about whether this is going to continue. There's always somebody around who's a hoarder, isn't there? But they're starting to worry about if this is going to continue. So some of them start hoarding extra for the following day. And then God gets annoyed with them, and he basically says, my paraphrase, I provide for you every flipping day, and you still don't trust me. That's the big beef that God has with them in Deuteronomy. And what Jesus does in the story we're looking at today is a sort of reenactment of it. The Jews spent 40 years wandering around the desert, and although God provided everything, they failed. They messed up. They gave in to all manner of temptations, and when it came down to it, they really didn't trust God at all. Jesus spends 40 days in the desert being tempted, and he doesn't give in. Despite the devil playing all his best cards, Jesus wins. Now let's look at why that happens. Jesus is facing the greatest temptation of all time, and he says, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God, and serve him only. And in the first two temptations in the passage, it says that Jesus answered Satan. It sort of sounds more polite. This time he says to Satan. It's not so much an answer as it is a sort of a bit of a pushier statement. And it's very firm. Get away from me, Satan. I don't want you around. I'm not listening to your offers. Go away. Just get out of my life. But there's also Jesus' reasoning. It's just like with the other times. In each of the temptations, he quotes something from the Bible. And all three times he refers back to that exact Old Testament story where the Jews in the desert got it wrong and where he will get it right. Now, it's really, really important for us to see here. It's not just that Jesus has remembered some nice Bible verses. Anybody can do that. It's that he knows what it's about and he believes what it says. There are loads of Bible verses we could take out of context on their own and make them say anything that we like at all. And that really wouldn't be helpful. But what Jesus does when he quotes the Bible is he goes to the particular story that is exactly the same as what he's now experiencing, and he knows that, and he thinks about what it says about God, and he lives it out. In Deuteronomy, God says, essentially, I've done all these things for you, I'm not going to abandon you, so you can trust me with what happens. Jesus knows that story. He knows what God is all about, and so he basically says, get lost, Satan, you've got no business with me. Worship God, serve him. He's trustworthy, and you simply are not. Jesus knows the big plan to rescue humanity cannot be done by a shortcut. It can only be done by choosing not just to follow God's overall plan, but doing it in God's way. You can't do the will of God by abandoning his way of going about it. And the thing about temptation, because of course it's always effective or it wouldn't be tempting, it always shows what your values are really. Not the ones that you say that you have, the ones that you actually have. And so temptation is always a challenge for us. It was for Jesus and it is for us. What's the solution? As we saw, knowing Bible verses is great, knowing them in context is even better, but it's not the whole answer. Let's step back from the passage just for a moment and think about this. Everyone in society, pretty much, will agree that we face temptation of various kinds. How do we move past it? How do we beat it? How do we push against it? I did a little bit of research around this. Lauren Nordgren, professor at Northwestern University in America, is a psychologist, and he studied temptation in great detail. And after lots of study, he basically said this: people have less self-restraint than they think, a false belief that often leads people to expose themselves to more temptation than they can handle. The cold self has a really hard time understanding what you're capable of in a moment of despair, in a moment of rage. I found another study, and in 2012, two psychologists called Hoffman and Baumeister, wonderful German names, got thousands of recorded samples of what 200 people were thinking at random points in the day. And after all this research, their conclusion was very simple. They said, we are literally dealing with temptation constantly. We're dealing with it constantly. And Baumeister investigated it further, and he concluded something that I just thought was amazing, which was this: your willpower depletes as you use it. In other words, your willpower gets tired out. It's actually, no, he's proven this through research. If beating temptation is just about being strong-willed and determined, eventually you'll give in. You'll lose. I mean, you might be okay with something that you overcome temptation, but generally you'll give in. So we're more vulnerable than we think we are to temptation, and we're facing it all of the time. What do? Most of the time, the answer society gives is it basically comes down to the same thing: be disciplined and try harder. There's something to be said for that, but as we just saw, the Baumeister study says doesn't seem to be enough. On the other hand, the classic Christian Sunday school response is that we copy Jesus and we know some Bible verses, we bring them to mind when we face temptation. And I think there's something to be said for that too, but I'm not convinced it's the whole story either. The critical thing for me, I think, is to understand, why did Jesus say no? The greatest temptation of all time, why on earth did he say no? It would have been so much easier. And it has to have been more than just discipline and good memory skills. The clue is in the specific thing Jesus says to that third temptation. You see, Satan offered him something he really wanted, something good. And it didn't work because it happened that there was one single thing that Jesus wanted even more. More than all the kingdoms of the earth, Jesus wanted relationship with God his Father. He wanted to be pleasing to God. That's the secret. It's what he loved most that made him say no. It's what he loved most that made him say no. What you love most is always the thing that wins, ultimately, when you're making a decision. When Jesus said no to Satan, he didn't immediately get the thing that he wanted, the kingdom of the earth. He didn't use the shortcuts. From this point, he goes on and over 3 years, he has this incredible but very hard ministry, and it culminates, as he expects, in being crucified. And he knew it would happen. In the Gospels, it records Jesus praying the night before he was arrested. And it's clear that on one level, of course, he doesn't want to go through with it. But he says to God, "Not my will, but yours be done." And he gets crucified. And then 3 days later, of course, he rises again, the foundational event of all of history. What Jesus wanted more than anything else, even more than the kingdoms of the earth, which is what he came for, was a great relationship with his Father, to do what God wanted him to do. Why did Jesus say no? Because he loved God more than anything else on offer, and he knew that God was trustworthy with the outcome. So how do you and I avoid temptation? The best way to avoid it in the long run is to love something else more. To love something else more. But you might say, well, how do you and I love God more? Do we just keep reading the Bible? Do we pray more? The main thing is this: keep seeing what he's done. Look at what Jesus gave up for you. Look at what he did. Nobody else loves you this much. And nothing compels us to love someone more than seeing that we're already on the receiving end of their love for us. And of course, there's practical stuff that helps. Discipline, knowing truth from the Bible, talking about it with other people is always really good, bit of accountability, healthy lifestyle choices and different things, avoiding situations where you're tempted in some way, all of that's really, really good. But when the thing that you love the most always wins, the key thing is to make God the centre of your affections. A few years ago, we did an online survey as a church around temptation, and a good 100 plus people from church responded. And the survey told us some really interesting things. But there was one particular question where I was just grabbed by what people said, and it's this one. The question we asked to all these people was, how does God see you when you fail and give in to temptation? How does God see you when you fail and when you give in to temptation? And by far the most common answer people gave to that was the word disappointment. Disappointment. I'm willing to bet that given that all of us give in to temptation quite often, a lot of us think that God spends a fair bit of time being disappointed with us. You might even be battling with giving into the same temptation again and again and again. You don't know how to stop, you don't know how to move on, and you just have this sense that God must be disappointed with you all the time. And let me just say, if that's true, if you think God looks down on you and thinks, oh no, she's let me down again, you believe something about God that ironically will make temptation more effective. Let me explain. The only thing in the Christian understanding of God that could make him disappointed in us is our sin. That's it. It's one thing, and it's a huge thing, but it's the only thing that would make him disappointed. Our inner rejection of God and his ways, our selfish preference for ourselves. But God isn't only disappointed at sin, he's downright furious. It's an affront to his very being. And that's the natural state of our relationship with God. But because of what Jesus has done, there's a swap. We get his track record with temptation, which was flawless. He never gave in. So if you've got Jesus, if you're one of his people, if you're a follower of him, God isn't furious with you. He's delighted with you. And if you miss this, the many temptations of life will always be overwhelmingly strong. That's the great irony. The reality is, every single time I give into temptation, every single sinful, bad thing I've ever done, God doesn't look at me with rage, which he has the right to. He looks at me with delight. And the same is true for anyone who follows Jesus. And it's that thing. It's that. It's taking hold of that. It's the application of that. It's seeing that in the long run is the thing that helps people to overcome temptation. If you're listening today and you're not a Christian, I'm aware this is some really heavy stuff. But the big idea is that yes, God is rightly mad at you because of your sin, because of the things that you do wrong. But he desperately loves you and he wants to delight in you. And that's why Jesus came and did what he did. He did what you couldn't. He lived what you couldn't. He died like you couldn't. And he rose again like you couldn't. And the more you see of that, what it means, what it cost, how it redeems your life, the more you will love the God who did it. And the grip of temptation will loosen and loosen and loosen. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much that Jesus did it. He won. He beat temptation. He beat the greatest temptation that there ever was. And he did it because his affections were pointed at you and nothing else. And thank you that he stands in our place. And that for everybody who knows him, everybody who's a follower of him, we can relax knowing that it's done. Temptation has been beaten forever. What a wonderful thing. Let us live in the light of that this week, Lord. Amen.